Hello, this is Jen from Windrose Fiber Studio. Today we're going to crochet the Solomon's Knot top. This top is a lacy layer, perfect for wearing over a tank top in the summer or doing some creative layering throughout the year. I think you're going to love the comfortable, relaxed fit. For this project, I'm using a medium weight yarn, in particular Landscapes Breeze by Lion Brand. I have 3 skeins here, but really I'm going to need 4. For this project, you're going to need anywhere between 500 and 700 yards, depending on the size that you're making. I'm also using a 5mm crochet hook. I have a yarn needle and a pair of scissors handy. In this project, it is very helpful to have some stitch markers or scrap pieces of yarn that you can use to mark your rows, and either a measuring tape or a ruler. Let's take a closer look at the design. So this is going to be a Solomon's Knot top. The Solomon's Knot stitch is going to give us a 4-way stretch and a very nice open lacy fabric. If I break down the design, this is a top that has a relaxed fit. It features a scooped neckline and 3/4 batwing sleeves. Batwing sleeves will mean that when your arms are resting at your sides, the hem will have a gentle curve and there'll be a little more extra flowy fabric. When your arms are extended, the fabric extends, the hemline becomes straight, and you have that extra fabric attaching the sleeves to the body of the top, giving that look of the batwing. I am presenting this pattern in 3 different widths. Now, it's hard to perfectly equate these sizes to traditional clothing sizes. Roughly, you can think of the smallest width as a small to medium, the median width as a large to extra large, and the largest width as anywhere from a 2X, maybe even up to a 4X. These numbers might seem quite wide to you, but remember, we are making an oversized, relaxed fit top. That being said, I highly recommend that you watch this video through once before you jump into making your own top. By watching the video, it will become clear just how easy it is to customize the sizing of your own personal Solomon's Knot top. Also, the top I make in the video is 21 inches long, and I will address how you can also customize the length of your top. This diagram shows the orientation of the top as we begin to crochet. We'll be starting with the right sleeve, working across the body, and then completing the front panel with the left sleeve. At last, we get to start our Solomon's Knot top. Once again, we're starting with the front of the top with the right sleeve, which is also going to be used as the gauge for this project. After joining our yarn to our hook with a slip knot, we're ready to begin row 1. Row 1 begins with a chain 1, and you want to keep this chain a little bit more relaxed because the next thing you're going to do is to work a single crochet into the back loop of that chain. Now we're ready to start our first Solomon's Knot stitch. This time we're going to elongate the loop on our hook until it's about 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter long. You can see that I'm using my thumb and middle finger to keep the back loop separate from the front loops as I yarn over and pull through the loop on my hook. To complete the Solomon's Knot stitch, you're going to insert your hook back underneath that back loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. Or in other words, you're going to be working a single crochet into this elongated back loop. Let's look at that a couple more times. So each Solomon's Knot stitch is going to consist of an elongated chain with a single crochet into the back loop. I just completed my second SK, which is going to be our abbreviation for the Solomon's Knot stitch. I'm going to do one more and then we'll check our length. These first 3 stitches should be measuring in at about 2 inches or 5 centimeters. If your row 1 is either a lot longer or shorter than mine, you will need to adjust the size of your loops on each of your Solomon's knots. Use your ruler to determine if the loops for each of your knots is truly at right about 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter. With a little practice, it'll get easier to keep the size of your loops for each stitch consistent. If this is a brand new stitch for you, it might be a good idea just to make a chain of Solomon's knots until you get really comfortable with the stitch. You can see I just measured again after making 6 SKs, and the length of row 1 was right about 4 inches. For row 1, we're going to be making a total of 14 SKs. Remember, SK is short for Solomon's knot stitches. I just finished the last SK of row 1, and now I'm just laying out row 1 to count my stitches. It's always a good idea to double check your count, and it's easy to count SKs by just counting those large loops. Now these last 2 loops are actually going to be our turning loops. If you measure the first 12 Solomon's knot stitches, it should measure right about at 8 inches. Once again, remember you can adjust the length of this row by adjusting the length of your loops for each SK stitch. Our last step in row 1 is to turn our work. The top of our stitches is the side with 2 threads. To begin row 2, we're going to skip the first 4 loops or the first 4 SK loops, and we're going to work a single crochet into the next stitch. Make sure you go under 2 threads. You're just working into a regular single crochet. Single crochet into this stitch, and you can see there are now 4 loops to the right of our hook. To continue on with row 2, we're going to start our repeating pattern. This begins by working 2 SKs. There's one, and here's my second one. And then we're going to skip 2 loops of row 1, 1 and 2, and we're going to work a single crochet into the next stitch. We're going to be repeating this pattern all the way across. Here's our first SK, and now our second SK. And then we're going to skip 2 loops and single crochet in the next stitch. Now it's back to the beginning of that repeat, and I'll meet you at the end of row 2. Before you know it, we're on our very last single crochet. And then we finish off row 2 by working 3 SKs. There's one. Here's our second one. And our third. And now we can turn our work and get ready for row 3. Before we move ahead, let's have a look at rows 1 and 2. I'm just going to lay it out and kind of shape it a little bit so you can see how the fabric is starting to form. But I also want to take this moment to take another measurement. Make sure that your piece is still measuring approximately 8 inches or 20 centimeters. If 8 inches seems like a narrow sleeve, remember that this is just the front panel. There's also going to be a back panel. In order to add or subtract width to your sleeve, you will do that by adding or subtracting multiples of 2 Solomon's knot stitches. So, hello, this is me beaming in from the future, as you can tell, because there is quite a bit more fabric, but there's just a few things that I wanted to point out. So this is our beginning tail, and this is row 1, and those are the 2 Solomon's knot stitches that wrap around. And that's the first single crochet of row 2, and then row 2 has those 2 SKs, skip 2, single crochet all the way across, and then we work 3 SKs and turn. Now the first two of these 3 turning SKs will always form the side of the row, and the third one becomes part of the shape internal to the fabric that sort of looks like an X. I just wanted to take a minute here, especially if you are perhaps new to using the Solomon's knot stitch, to really talk about how these stitches form our fabric. While I'm here, I also wanted to point out that if you want to test the width of your sleeve, you can lay it over the widest part of your forearm just below the elbow and make sure that it's going a little more than halfway around. This means that you'll have plenty of room in the sleeves of your top. Now we can jump right back into our project. Rows 3 through 8 all have the same instructions. For each of these rows, you're going to skip the first 4 loops, and then you're going to single crochet in the next stitch. After that, we start our repeat for these rows. You're going to work 2 SKs, skip the next 2 loops, and then single crochet in the next stitch. You'll go back to the beginning of the repeat, and you'll work this repeat all the way across. At the end of the row, you'll work your 3 SK stitches and turn. Remember, the first 2 of these 3 SK stitches become the side at the end of the row. The third SK stitch becomes part of the first X shape on the following row. Before I leave you to crochet rows 3 through 8, I just want to talk about how to count your rows. So I've just finished row 3, and let's have a look. Now, with just 3 rows, it's pretty easy to keep track, but when your piece becomes much larger, sometimes it can get a little confusing. So let's just have a look at our little piece of fabric. When I extend the fabric, you can easily see row 1, row 2 making up the bottom half of the X, and then row 3 the top half of the X. Another easy way to count this is just by counting X's. Every X shape will equal 2 rows. Here we have rows 1 through 8 complete, which is also the front of our right sleeve. And we're also using these 8 rows as the gauge for our project. The length of your row should measure approximately 8 inches or 20 centimeters wide, and the height of rows 1 through 8 should measure approximately 5 inches or 12.5 centimeters. As you can see, our fabric does have a lot of stretch, but your sizing should be very close to what I have here if you want your finished top's size to work out accurately. If your size is way off, it's better to stop now and go back and adjust your loop size. Your hook size should be fine for a medium weight yarn, but if you really feel it's necessary, you could also adjust your hook size. Once you have an accurate gauge swatch, you're all set to move on. Speaking of moving on, let's replace our crochet hook in our last loop and continue on with row 8. After the last single crochet of row 8, instead of working 3 SKs and turning, we are actually going to be working 23 SKs and then turning. This is where we are creating the length of our top. Remember, our top is going to be 21 inches long. If you want to increase or decrease the length of your top, I have written the information you need here. The most important thing to keep in mind is that you need to have an odd number of SK stitches at the end of row 8. Here is how our piece looks. At the end of row 8, I have completed the 23 Solomon's knot stitches, and now I am turning my work and heading in to row 9. You can see that I'm making sure that the top of these stitches are facing up. That is the side with 2 threads. And then I'm going to skip the first 4 loops and work a single crochet in the next stitch. Now it's back into our repeating pattern. You're going to work 2 SK stitches, and then you're going to skip the next 2 loops, and you're going to work a single crochet in the next stitch. Be careful not to let this single length of SK stitches twist as you're working your way up until you reach the sleeve, but just continue to work this repeating pattern all the way across. I'm stopping here just before the sleeve so that you can see if your count is working out correctly. There should be an SK loop before the sleeve starts and after you get into the sleeve. If this is not the case for your piece, you likely had an even number of SK stitches instead of an odd number at the end of row 8, and you'll need to go back and double check your stitch count. Beyond that troubleshooting, you should be all set to finish off row 9 by skipping those last 2 loops, working a single crochet in the last stitch, and then working 3 SK stitches and turning. The beginning of row 10 is also where the directions are going to start to vary for the 3 different sizes. In the parentheses, you'll work the first instructions, 10 through 20 rows, for the smallest size. If you're working the middle size, you'll follow these directions for rows 10 through 24. And if you're doing the largest size, you're going to follow these directions for rows 10 through 28. I'm going to be working up the size in the middle, which I likened to a large/extra large. So I'm going to be working these directions for rows 10 through 24. At this point, I'd like to add some stitch markers. I'm going to count off my first 8 rows, so it's 2, 4, 6, 8, and I'm going to go ahead and place a stitch marker around an SK stitch on row 8. Remember, row 8 is the last row of the sleeve, and then the extension of row 8 becomes the beginning of the side. We can use that 8th row stitch marker to count from that point on: 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and you can see that I've placed another stitch marker at the end of that row. Remember, your number of rows will be 20 if you're doing the smallest size and 28 if you're doing the largest size. Now let's carry on with our pattern by working our neck shaping. From this point on, the numbers are going to look different for each size, so please pay attention to the size you're making and those numbers in parentheses, although the directions are the same for all of us for this next row. Whether it be row 21, 25, or 29, we're going to skip the first 4 loops, single crochet in the next stitch, and then do that repeating pattern of 2 SK stitches, skip 2 loops, single crochet in the next stitch. We're going to repeat that all the way across until only 4 loops remain. I have time traveled us there. You can see the stitch marker marking that previous row, and now there are 4 SK loops left. This is not counting these 2 loops that make up the top edge of the front panel. These are the 4 remaining loops from the previous row. We're going to be leaving these 4 loops unworked. So now there's nothing left to do but to complete this row by working 3 SK stitches and turning. Working the number of rows indicated by your pattern size, skip the first 4 loops, single crochet in the next stitch, and then back into that repeating pattern. 2 SK stitches, skip 2 loops, and then single crochet in the next stitch. Repeat this pattern all the way across. At the end of each row, you'll work 3 SK stitches and turn. Before I leave you to work these rows, I just want to pop back in and show you what it looks like when you get back up to the neckline. There are our 4 unworked Solomon's knot stitches. And here we are at the end of this row, and this is where you're going to be placing your last single crochet. At this point, I am sure you have found your rhythm, and I truly hope that you're enjoying the flow of the Solomon's knot stitch. I will meet you back here at the end of the neckline. So let's go ahead and check out our work thus far. Here is row 1, and remember we also marked row 8, and then we have a stitch marker in the last row before we worked our neckline. I also placed a stitch marker in the first row of the neckline. If you're working one of the first 2 sizes, your neck will have a total of 10 rows. If you're working the largest size, your neck will have a total of 12 rows. Because it's going to happen to all of us at some point in this project, I wanted to look at how to join a new skein. I prefer to add a new skein either at the top or bottom edge so that I'm not weaving in loose ends in the middle of the project. If you're working with a solid color, you don't really have to worry about lining up colors as you see me doing here with my self-striping yarn. When you're ready, go ahead and go back to that last single crochet of the row and use this as the point to introduce your new skein. Now, watching back the video, I realized that I accidentally skipped a step there, but you'll want to introduce your new skein with the yarn over pull through 2 at the end of that single crochet. Because this fabric is so open, I'm going to go ahead and tie up these loose ends in a gentle square knot just as an insurance policy to make sure that my work does not come apart. With that bit of yarn maintenance complete, we're ready to carry on with our pattern. Here are the directions for the next row, and I'm jumping ahead to working the last single crochet of that row, and this is where we're going to extend the row to get back up to the height of the shoulder. At the end of this row, instead of working 3 SKs and turning, you'll be working 7 SKs and turning. I'm just finishing up these 7 SKs before I turn, and I'm going to go ahead and slide my work so you can see the other half of the top of the neck. Now we have enough stitches to bring the left side up to shoulder height. Let's place a stitch marker and mark this as the first row of the left side of the front of our top. Now it's time to turn our work and carry on. For rows 32 through 43, or 36 through 51, or 42 through 61, you're going to be following the same repeat pattern that we have been working throughout this entire project. You begin by skipping 4 loops, single crochet in the next stitch, and then the repeating pattern begins. 2 Solomon's knot stitches, skip 2 loops, single crochet in the next stitch, and then back to the beginning of that repeat. You're going to continue this all the way across. At the end of each row, you'll work 3 SKs and turn. I'll meet you at the end of this section. We're over halfway through the front panel of our Solomon's knot top. I am going to time travel once again and take us to the very last row of this section. Because I am doing the size in the middle, for me this is row 51. For you it may be row 43 or 61. We are still following the same directions, but I wanted to point out that the last row of the body, the row we're working on right now, also becomes the first row of the left sleeve. If you recall, row 8 of this project was both the last row of the right sleeve and the row we added stitches to, so it became the first row of the body. So we are duplicating that on the opposite side. I just placed a blue stitch marker marking the last row of the body, and up high I'm going to place an orange stitch marker, and this is going to mark the first row of the left sleeve. We have just 7 more rows to go to complete this panel. These are the sleeve rows, which means that they are shorter. So look carefully at these directions. You're going to be working these rows in the same way, but you're only going to be doing the repeat 5 times. At the end of each row, you'll work 3 SKs and turn. And I would also like you to really be thoughtful about the size of your loops on your Solomon's knot stitches. Sometimes as you're working through the body, your tension can change a little bit. You want this sleeve to be the same size as your first sleeve. You might even want to stop after doing a row and measure and make sure this sleeve opening is about 8 inches wide. If not, you may need to adjust the size of your stitches just to make sure both of your sleeves match. Here we are at the end of our last row. At the end of this row, you will not work those 3 SKs and turn. You can cut your working yarn, pull it through the last loop on your hook, and now there's nothing left to do but admire your completed front panel. Please don't worry that the neck opening is very squared off right now. We will be rounding that out when we do the neck trim, but let's take a walk down memory lane. Here we are at the beginning up until row 8, and then the first side of the body, and then we worked our rows across the neckline, the second side of the body, all the way to our left sleeve. I created this schematic of our front panel. I find it really helpful to look at a picture like this, especially if I want to adjust my size a little bit. It also really helps you appreciate the symmetry of the top. Both sleeves have 8 rows. The distance between the sleeves and the neck opening are the same on either side, and so on. I hope this picture will serve as a useful reference as you work your way through this project. I also thought that this would be a nice time to just show you a little bit of weaving in your loose ends. Working with an open fabric, it's a little bit more challenging. The best place to weave in your loose ends is where we work one single crochet into another, so you may need to travel down with your yarn to one of those points, and I only like to weave in one end in each one of these sections. Now if I'm traveling across a loop, I don't pull the yarn tight there because I don't want to cinch that loop closed. So you might just need to travel with your yarn until you reach a good spot for making a few passes back and forth and really securing your loose ends. Arguably, the fabric created by the Solomon's knot stitch is quite reversible. However, I do like to consider that the right side is facing you as you are working the odd numbered rows. Now that we have the front of our top complete, we need to crochet the back panel. This is my completed back panel, and you can see as I pull it across the screen, it's worked in the same way as the front panel, and the only difference is you're not creating any shaping for the neck. So these are all just going to be straight rows of Solomon's knot stitch crochet back and forth all of the way across. I have still taken the time to mark the same rows on the back panel as I did on the front panel, and that's going to help us line our 2 panels up later. So here is an overview of what the back panel looks like, and you can see it's that same shape without the neck cut out. Here are all of the directions that you need written out for you so that you can complete the back panel. Pause the video here and use these instructions as well as the timestamps provided so that you can navigate this section of the project. When both of your panels are complete, lay them so that the right sides are facing each other. Once again, these look very reversible, so if you just can't tell the right side from the wrong side, that's okay. Go ahead and make your own call on which is the right side and make sure those right sides are facing each other. As you can see, I've taken the time to really line these panels up one on top of the other. I have the wrong side of the front of the top facing me, and I'm going to slide it down because we are going to start attaching our seams, and we're going to begin with one corner, this seam right here, and work our way from the bottom corner all the way up to the end of the sleeve. Let's talk through these side seams. Now you'll notice on the corner of each panel we have 3 Solomon's knot stitches. We're going to start in the loop on the very middle stitch. As we crochet these seams, we're only going to be inserting our hook under one of the threads on each of the corresponding loops. After that, you're going to yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. So we just joined with a standing single crochet, and then we're going to insert our hook back into that same space and work another single crochet. Into the next 2 corresponding loops, we're going to work 2 single crochets. Remember, we're just going under one thread on each loop, and it really doesn't matter which thread you choose. After these 2 single crochets, you're going to chain 1, and then we're going to start our repeating pattern. We'll be working 2 single crochets, 2 single crochets, chain 1, 2 single crochets, 2 single crochets, chain 1, and you'll notice that the chain 1 always occurs over the single crochet that connects this row to the previous one. We're going to continue this repeating pattern up to the base of the sleeve. So we work 2 single crochets in the next corresponding loops, and then you work 2 more single crochets in the next corresponding loops, and then you chain 1. Here's the first 2 single crochets, 1, 2, then we move on to the next 2 corresponding loops, 1 single crochet, our second single crochet, and then we chain 1. Once again, that chain 1 always takes place over the single crochet that connects this row to the row below. When you get to the base of the sleeve, you're going to work 2 single crochets in those next 2 corresponding loops, and then chain 1, and then right back to that repeating pattern. There is one SK stitch that's standing alone here, kind of breaking up the pattern, but then we go directly back into our pattern. When you reach the end of the sleeve, work a single crochet on the side of these seams, working through the single crochets on the edge of each panel. At this point, you can go ahead and cut your working yarn. Then yarn over and pull it through the final loop on your hook, and this seam is now complete. Look how nice and neat our first seam is, and now we need to repeat this for the other side. If we take a sneak peek at the right side of the work, you can see how nice and tidy these seams are going to look when you're wearing your top. Now you can flip your work over and crochet the side seam for the opposite side. Once again, you'll be starting in the corner and working your way up the side to the end of the sleeve. Once you have both side seams done, we'll start working on our shoulder seams. To prepare for crocheting our shoulder seams, make sure both panels are lined up. This is when those stitch markers really come in handy. I have 10 rows between my neckline, and you will either have 10 or 12. Counting those rows and making sure you have the right number in between either side of your neckline is a great way to double check and make sure everything is lined up correctly. Then you're going to go ahead and mark the Solomon's knot stitch at the corner where that neckline row meets the back row of your top. Once you have these stitches marked, you'll be able to use them as a guide working across these shoulder seams. The shoulder seams are going to be worked in the same manner as the side seams. You can see that I am sliding my work over to get to the corner, which is also the top of one of our sleeves. There are going to be 3 SK stitches here, and we're going to be starting in the middle SK stitch. You're going to join with a single crochet, working through 1 loop of the corner SKs on each panel, and then you'll single crochet in the same space. To continue, work 2 single crochets in the next loops. After that, chain 1 and we begin our repeating pattern. Just like the side seams, you're going to work 2 single crochets in the next corresponding loops 2 times and then chain 1. Let's look at that one more time. Here is our first set of corresponding loops, and we're going to work 2 single crochets, and then we're going to work 2 more single crochets in the next 2 corresponding loops, after which we'll work a chain 1. You're going to go back to the beginning of this repeat and repeat this pattern all the way across the shoulder seam until you reach your marked stitch. After working 2 single crochets into that marked stitch, this side of the shoulder is complete, and then you can finish off your work and repeat this process for the other shoulder seam. Once you have your side and shoulder seams complete, it's time to turn your work right side out. Of course, I always take a minute to admire the process. Here's our second shoulder seam, and then our second side seam. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn this top right side out. We might as well take a moment to also admire how nice our seams look from the right side of our work. It's so satisfying to see how perfectly all of our rows are lining up. So now we have the right side of our top facing us, and I'm also looking at the front and at the neckline. I'm going to go ahead and take a minute to remove all of these stitch markers because we don't need them anymore, although keep 2 of them handy because we're going to reuse 2 of these stitch markers to mark the lower corners at the front of our neckline. So we are going to start from our shoulder seam, and then we're going to count down these Solomon's knot stitches. We're going to count 4 loops, and then in the 5th loop down, that is the loop right at that corner that's sort of right now forming a right angle, and we want to soften that right angle so that we can make a nice curved neckline. Now you can either skip the 10 or 12 rows of the neckline and then mark the next SK stitch, or you can count down from the shoulder on the other side of the neckline. Remember, we are marking the 5th loop down from the shoulder on either side, right in those corner SK stitches. We are now all set to crochet our neck trim. I'm going to turn the top over. The right side is still facing out, but we have the back side of the top facing us. You can see that I am counting my rows so I can find the Solomon's knot stitch that is just left of the center, and now I'm selecting a little bit of yarn in the color that I want to use for my neck trim. I'm going to go ahead and join my yarn to my hook with a slip knot, and then we're going to join our yarn to the fabric with a standing single crochet in that Solomon's knot stitch just left of the center point of the back. Once again, we're going to be working through just one of the threads of the loop. Insert our hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 for our standing single crochet, and then we're going to work another single crochet in that same stitch. For the neckline, you are going to work 2 single crochets in the next Solomon's knot loop all the way around. Let's take a minute or two and crochet along together. The neckline actually goes really quickly. Remember, you're just working your way across these loops, placing 2 single crochets in each loop with no chain ones in between this time. Before you know it, we're at our first shoulder seam, and there will be a loop both before and after the shoulder seam. Go ahead and tuck in that beginning tail or ending tail from the seam that you worked there. And then we're going to continue on down from the shoulder. And when you get to this first marked stitch, we mark this stitch so we could skip the stitch. So you're going to skip the marked stitch and work 2 single crochets in the next loop. So you're working 2 single crochets in each loop around the neckline with the exception of the 2 marked stitches. By skipping those corner stitches, it's going to round off the edges of our neckline and give us that nice curve or scoop to the neck that we're looking for. I'm going to go ahead and speed things up because the second half of the neckline is worked just like the first. We're working our 2 single crochets in each loop across the front of the top. When we get to the second stitch marker, we're going to skip over that loop and work 2 single crochets in the next loop. And then we're going to go up this side of the neckline. Take out a knot in our yarn because knots happen. And then tucking in that tail, we're going to work across the second shoulder seam. And then we're going to go ahead and finish off by working across these loops on the back until we've worked 2 single crochets into the last loop. We're back where we started, and it's time to finish off. To finish off, go ahead and cut your working yarn. And then you can pull on your hook to pull that cut in through. Use that to thread through a yarn needle. And now we're going to do an invisible finish off. So we're going to skip the first stitch of the round and work our needle under both threads of the second stitch. Now we're going to pass our needle back through our very last stitch between the front and back loops, also picking up that little thread just behind the back loop of this last stitch. When you gently pull on this yarn, it closes and looks just like another stitch in the round. I have a full tutorial for how to make an invisible finish off, and I will link that in the description below, or you can just simply finish off in your own preferred way. I just wanted to show you this way because it's a very nice seamless finish. Here's a look at our completed neckline. You can see that I'm shaping it just a little bit with my fingers, but it has a nice gentle curve. And at this point, our very last step is to remove any remaining stitch markers and then to go ahead and weave in all of the remaining loose ends. You can see that there's 4 at each sleeve, 1 at each lower corner, a few at the neckline, so I will meet you right back here after we've done that weaving. Before I show you the finished top on my mannequin, I just wanted you to see that the width of my top is 27 inches wide, 21 inches long, just as intended for the middle size. Here is our completed Solomon's knot top. Now remember, this is the middle size, and to give you a better idea of the fit, the mannequin that I'm showing the top on has measurements that are 38 inches through the bust, 28 through the waist, and 38 through the hips. The oversized, relaxed fit means that there is extra fabric, and you can particularly see this from the profile view. Both the front and back of the top have a gentle curve and that extra flowy fabric, particularly when your arms are resting at your sides. The bat wings come into play when your arms are outstretched. And yes, I am hiding behind my mannequin just to show you the bat wings. I gave myself a little extra editing time on this project, which made it possible for me to make a second Solomon's knot top in a solid color. This is Barocco's Remix, and I'll also link this yarn in the description below. The measurements of this mannequin are 36, 26, 36, so just a little bit smaller than the previous mannequin, but I also made this top just a little bit smaller. And I did that because I really wanted to show you how easy it is to make little adjustments to the size of your top. Here is that schematic drawing that I shared with you before, but this time I have replaced the numbers with the numbers that I used for this solid top. You can see that instead of 16 rows between the sleeves and the neck opening, I've done 14 rows on each side, but then I've also added 2 rows to the sleeves. They have 10 instead of 8 because I still wanted the sleeves to be 3/4 in length. I hope this example will show you how easy it is to customize your own top, but please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them of me in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this project. The Solomon's knot top is a lacy, versatile layer that I think you'll have a lot of fun incorporating into your wardrobe. Please hit like and subscribe so you never miss a project or what's happening behind the scenes here at Windrose Fiber Studio. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.